Has the Green Deal been consigned to the rubbish tip of history? Has it become too unwieldy, overregulated, too ambitious and expensive? And what about the level of compulsion needed to implement this idea on European electorates? So, for our good and at our expense, join me, Jan Daraj, for How We Got Here.
Keep it alive!
Green energy, green cars, green transition, green this, green that. The Green Deal has been seen by some, including its authors, in the European Commission as
essential for prosperity. I want to be very clear. The European Union stays on course for the Green Deal objectives without any question.
regardless, the policy's staple net zero emissions goal has earned itself critics, even in the European Parliament. The European People's Party is one of them.
First, we propose that we move away from penalising combustion engine car producers. Secondly, there should be a revision of the sale ban on such vehicles no later than this year.
Europe's shrinking car industry is just one of the symptoms of the old continent's lackluster competitiveness and problems with the green transition. As more and more Chinese cars are registered in Europe, some EU members continue cooking on Russian gas. This is a jibe at Slovakia, which started receiving Russian gas via Turkey's Turkstream pipeline on Thursday. The move came after Ukraine turned off the valve of Russian gas flowing through its territory at the beginning of 2025. The gas is pumped through a 930-kilometre pipeline laid on the Black Sea bed, connecting to overground pipelines supplying not only Slovakia, but also Hungary, Serbia and Bulgaria. Now, can the EU still meet its ambitious emission reduction targets? Some argue for expanding its share of renewables in the energy mix. The REPowerEU plan aimed to boost renewables to 45% of total energy by 2030. The scheme has already reduced gas consumption by 18% across the EU, contributed to overcoming the bloc's dependency on Russian fossil fuels, ensured access to secure and affordable energy, produced more electricity from wind and solar than from gas for the first time ever, and rapidly increased renewable energy installation. The EU has also diversified its natural gas sources by increasing LNG imports from the US, Qatar and Norway. At the same time, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan are shipping Russian gas to Europe and are often misrepresented as alternative sources of this resource. While some coal plants were temporarily restarted, nuclear power is experiencing rehabilitation, with France leading expansion efforts and Poland building its first nuclear power plant. All of this in a bid to save European industry's competitiveness, while also immunising them against the old temptation of living off resources from despotic countries.
I'm delighted to welcome our guest today, Piotr Przybyło, the resident fellow at the Kazimierz Pulaski Foundation here in Warsaw. Welcome to the programme.
Hello.
We're going to be discussing the Green Deal.
Right.
From their website, from the EU website, they're striving to establish a climate-neutral continent, 0% emissions. And then what? Does the EU have any vision of what a zero emissions, fit for 55 kind of Europe will look like? What's going to happen to us?
Well, I would like to take a step back and actually ask you a question. Is that even possible? The net zero economy, net zero sort of, the world, not net zero continent of Europe. I think this is the sort of the ideal to which we might want to, try to sort of achieve, to go on the path, to achieve that. But whether this is actually possible, I highly doubt that. We can take an example of Denmark, the first country in Europe that sort of just not that long time sort of, announced, that this is the, achieved the net zero sort of, the economy, the country is at zero of sort of, carbon emissions. But what really happened in this country is that it's a very limited sort of industry, that's one. And most importantly, they shift their carbon emissions on developing countries, and because it's a very rich country, they can afford to sort of purchase those products that they require, on a daily basis, elsewhere. So actually they shifted the problem of carbon emissions on someone else. So I actually think that Europe is doing very, very similar sort of, the concept. Maybe they will achieve sort of, the net zero, and that's great. But on a sort of, the global scale, there's going to be absolutely no difference.
So we're going to be in our emissions-free Europe, fresh air, fresh water, clean water. The rest of the world is just going to have all the problems with it.
Well, that's what it looks like, right? When you look at this is really interesting. When you look at the sort of global energy consumption, and then you divide it onto each continent, you can see that Asia, Africa, South America are skyrocketing in terms of energy consumption. There are only two continents that sort of, we can observe a plateau of energy consumption. That's Europe, and to some degree that's North America. And we might think that this is because we achieve such a effective and efficient energy consumption. Well, that's actually not true. It's because of the deindustrialization of the continents and shifting those sort of energy emissions elsewhere. That's why we obtain that sort of a plateau of energy consumption. We need to be actually really sort of honest with each other whether this is where we want to go, deindustrialization. And while you can see that North America is waking up, from that deindustrialization, they're trying to reindustrialize, because that's where innovation, that's where sort of, economy, that's where sort of, the wealth is coming from. Europe is still sort of blindly moving towards that path. Yeah?
How do you account for that? Is this an ideology of the establishment, the elite, the political elites in Europe, wedded to this vision of the Green Deal, the green option? This
is where we sort of, mentioned just before, we started the conversation, when we had a chat before. I think the people, masses, sort of, the mistake pollution with actual sort of, the climate changes due to sort of, the industry and, increased carbon emissions.
Industrial anthropogenic stuff.
Exactly, yes. Right. Yeah. So I think this, as I totally support sort of, the preventing sort of pollution and sort of, clean planet, I'm not really sure whether we are able to sort of, cut the carbon emissions to such a level that we can obtain that sort of net zero. And I think we should be very frank with the sort of, the messages to our populations, whether this is possible or not. At the end, something that, has been sort of an issue of African countries, energy poverty we are facing right now in Europe, right? Sort of, the blackouts, the problems with sort of,
heat rooms
in UK, in London, right? Sort of, the struggling with paying the sort of electricity bills, and the thinking whether I should, turn on my light or whether I should heat my room, for the night. Those issues Europe never faced those issues, right? Energy poverty is actually a problem right now in Europe.
And how does the elite, our authorities in Europe, try and persuade their electorates to accept cold rooms, higher energy bills for this noble ideal of the Green Deal, zero emissions result? The Draghi report that Europe must be more competitive. How can it be more competitive with using expensive energy?
Yeah. So to answering the first part of your question, I will tell you how they do it. We hear constantly about Europe producing electricity from renewable sources at the level of 45%. So domestic electricity production in Europe reaches 45%. That number is massive. But actually, it's not exactly how it should be. We should be looking at it, because we are talking about the domestic electricity production from renewable sources. Over 60% of our energy sources coming from elsewhere. They're not being produced here. So that number already should be cut. At the end, we are talking, people mistake electricity with energy mix. So there's a really small proportion of electricity that we actually need. We need energy which is related not only to electricity but also to transportation, to heating, etc. So we are still heavily relying on fossil fuels. And that's not going to change. The world relies on fossil fuels, so we should be very clear with that message that yes, we should invest in sort of renewable energy sources because we're trying to, have a cleaner air, yes, the cleaner water, etc.
We can all subscribe to this idea of a non-polluting mentality.
Yeah, but the world relies on fossil fuels.
Where does this leave the thorny question of Russian oil and gas?
Right.
War in Ukraine, economic sanctions, but yet a few countries, Hungary, Slovakia, Austria, they're still heavily reliant on Russian gas. Even Germany has these arguments for business as usual with the Russian gas supply.
Yeah.
Do they have a point? Or should politics, geopolitics?
Maybe I will tell you something a bit controversial. From a purely climate perspective, a prevention of sort of, the climate change, etc., the pipeline gas, for example, produces less carbon emissions than LNG. I'm not trying to sort of point you towards that we should reopen sort of, our pipelines with Russia, but, I'm trying to be very frank with you.
Those are the dilemmas we face.
Yeah, those are the dilemmas, right? But in the same time, European Union did not put the sanctions on LNG from Russia, right? It's actually, the LNG sort of, the supplies from Russia are increasing about 20% each year. And I don't think that ever going to be the sanctions on LNG from Russia, because we do need to take those fossil fuels from somewhere, right? Because otherwise we will collapse economically, right? And
yes, there are certain decisions which are very uncomfortable to discuss, aren't they?
Absolutely, yes.
How does the Green Deal place European future economic growth?
Right.
Is that a threat to it? We're going to need perhaps the nuclear option, the fossil fuels are back on stream. How does that affect? Are our ambitions plus realities incompatible? I suppose that's
so you mentioned earlier the Draghi report, which is sort of directly related to innovation and sort of economy in order to create those competitive advantages, for Europe, on the global markets. And there's again several sort of, the aspects of this. If we're gonna fully rely on renewable energy sources, I actually don't have good news for you, because in terms of renewables, such as sort of, the solar panels or, the wind farms, Europe is actually not the best place to fully utilize this infrastructure. And very few people actually speak about it. The same solar panel mounted on the roof on a house in London is going to produce 3 times less electricity than the same panel mounted, in the United States.
Yes.
Are we properly utilizing our resources? Because the same solar panel, we needed to use exactly the same resources, that that needed to be mined somewhere, that needed to be transported somewhere.
Huge hole in China, getting all the...
So are we really, again, speaking about protecting the climate and limiting carbon emissions, or we are just saying that we're going to be green because Europe needs to be green? I think this is a huge sort of, the dilemma that we should actually be very, very honest and speak more about it, right? So,
how do you see the debate or the ideology of the Green Deal, the Green Movement? How do you see that shifting? Is it going to just be being pedalled back in the UK, for example?
Yeah.
The Polish, there have been Polish noises to cast a shadow of a doubt on the Green Deal. Do you see the actual mechanisms, this great European project, being redefined so that couple of years' time, it's just going to be something else? People just say, well, we never really said that.
I'm going to say it like this. Either we're going to have a Green Deal, or we're going to have a societal contract as it is, and sort of with the societal protection as we have right now. Those two things cannot exist at the same time. On top of that, or we're going to have an energy security and properly prepare in terms of defense with the sort of, the threat from the east, or we're going to have a Green Deal. I don't think that we are able to have those three things at the same time.
Yes, it's a trilemma.
Absolutely, yes. A three-body problem, yes.
Yeah, a final question to you. Where do you see the green movement, the green ideology, Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion, all those related generational mentalities? Where do you see that? When did that become almost an orthodoxy? Yeah. Was it 1980s, 1990s? It was an evolution, obviously, but where did you?
I think the first sort of, from sort of, my knowledge, the first sort of this type of sort of, the raising the alarm about, the sea level is going to rise, the whole ice is going to sort of melt, etc., happened already in 70s. That was the sort of the first, moments that sort of those sort of discussions started occurring, and and the predictions were that at this time right now we're going to be already underwater, and there's going to be no skiing in Alps, right? So
I heard that we're going to have an ice age as well by the 1980s.
Absolutely, yeah. Just out of sort of the curiosity, actually, when we truly believe in the models about a sort of climate change, there's a sort of a scenario that with the sort of rising the sort of the temperature, the global temperature, we're gonna have to stop the Gulf Stream because of sort of differences of the temperature. So I have information for you. This is gonna be sort of probably shocking for you. Europe actually is gonna get colder, not warmer, because the sort of it's because of the Gulf Stream that sort of brings all that sort of warm sort of the air and warm water that we sort of can experience such a moderate climate. When you look at the same sort of the position on the sort of coast of Canada, we have the icebergs there. So can you imagine sort of icebergs the floating in the sort of the English Channel, because that's what's going to happen if the temperature is going to rise to that level, right? So a lot of sort of different factors.
Science again.
Absolutely, yes.
Some say this, some say that. We must stop it there, but fascinating discussion. Piotr Przybyło, thank you very, very much for coming on to the
Thank you for the invite. Appreciate it.
That's all we have time for, unfortunately. Join us next time, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 2:15 CET. See you then.